about this time last year, I spoke at a singles retreat in Nashville, for a church in Nashville. I spoke at the singles retreat, and I went up there Friday night, and my wife was going to join me on Saturday. I got up there Friday night, and there weren't many people there when I arrived. And the worst part is, I had forgotten to bring anything to read, which for me is like the worst case scenario imaginable, because I love to read and I don't like to talk to people. And so I was stuck. So I'm up there at this retreat center all by myself, but I managed to find something to read. And they're actually these little books. I don't know if you've seen them, but they're million sellers. They're best sellers. They've spawned a whole series of them, but the one that I had was the original one. It's called Worst Case Scenario Survival Handbook by Joshua Piven. Has anyone seen these? Have you read them? They're very, very clever in the way they're written, and they have the craziest things on how to survive the most bizarre things, what to do, how to avoid being stampeded by an elephant is actually in there, because I know that troubles you and keeps you awake at night. What do I do if I find myself stampeded by elephants? You know what they actually say? That you should actually lay down. That was the thing for elephants. Lay down, because elephants don't like to step on things. Seriously, I'm not making this up. What they said, because the way elephants' feet are, they're very careful about what they step on, and so they don't step on top of logs and things like that. They're always very careful to step over logs. So if you lay down, they might think that you're a log. And it also said, be sure you protect your face. So what to do if you jump out of an airplane and your parachute doesn't open? What to do? There's all kinds of crazy things. I'm not making this up. This is from the Worst Case Scenario Survival Handbook by Joshua Piven. What to do if attacked by an anaconda. You ready for this? They got 10 things that you have to do if you're attacked by an anaconda. 1, do not run. The snake is faster than you are. Who knew? Anacondas could be that fast. Number 2, lie flat on the ground. This is a common thing for all of their lie flat on the ground. 3, put arms at sides and legs tight against one another. 4, the snake will climb on top of you and nudge you. 5, do not panic. Number 6, the snake will always begin to swallow you from the feet end first. Actually, something about the snake will always start at the feet first. Number 7, lie still. This may take a while. Number 8, when the snake has reached your knees, slowly take out your knife and slide it into the side of the snake's mouth between the edge of its mouth and your leg. Number 9, suddenly rip upwards, severing snake's head. Number 10, make sure you brought a knife. Crazy things in this book. What to do if you're charged by a bull. The number 1 thing it says, do not antagonize the bull. Stupid bull, you know. Okay, so I have a couple here, and I want to test our survival skills out here in suburban Atlanta. So I'm going to give you multiple choice on a couple of these, all right? The question is, what should you do if confronted by an angry mountain lion? This is from the book, okay? What to do? What should you do if confronted by an angry mountain lion? A, run. B, play dead. C, make yourself look bigger by opening your coat. Or D, sing a gentle, happy song. Just turn to your neighbor and tell them which one you think it is. Is it A, B, C, or D? What do you think? How many of you said sing a happy, gentle song? You were wrong. It actually says make yourself look bigger by opening your coat. They don't like large objects. So, all right, here's the next question. Same question. You're confronted by an angry mountain lion, except you have a child with you. Okay? What should you do? A, pick the child up. B, shield the child with your body. C, shield your body with the child. Or D, run. Because you can't outrun the mountain lion, but you don't really have to. What? So what should you do? Should you pick the child up, shield the child with your body, shield your body with the child, or run? Which is it, A, B, C, or D? Turn to your neighbor and tell him. You know what it is? Pick the child up. That's what it said. Because if you pick the child up, you'll look bigger. See, that makes sense. So now it's a very, very clever book, and they've got a whole series of them. The worst case scenario survival handbook, and they do different versions of them. Travel, and when wild animals attack, and when you go to college, and when you play golf. And I mean, they've done a whole slew of these books. And this is what they say in the introduction. This is what the author says. The principle behind this book is a simple one. You just never know. You never really know what curves life will throw at you or what is lurking around the corner. You never really know when you might be called upon to choose life or death with your actions. But when you are called, you need to know what to do. That's why this book was written. Because you just never know. I was 20 years old, I guess. And I was working for a summer out in the Smoky Mountains, right at the edge of the entrance to the Smoky Mountains. And I met a very good friend of mine. He was in my wedding, in fact. And his name was Stephen. And Stephen is a very, very funny guy, a writer. He's worked on a couple of movies out in Los Angeles as a writer and as an actor. He's been a stand-up comic. He's a very, very funny, very engaging guy. He was 22 years old and had just graduated from college. And Stephen started having some health trouble. Couldn't figure out what it was. And it just wouldn't go away. And he's 22 years old, and he's having night sweats. And he comes into my room one night, in the middle of this, probably 4 in the morning, and he says, "John, I think I'm dying. You got to take me to the hospital." And we took him to the hospital, and they started doing a series of blood tests, and it turns out he had Hodgkin's disease. You just never know. It was a couple of years ago on Labor Day weekend. In fact, I was headed over to meet my friend Dane Booth. You guys know, some of you know Dane. I was headed over to meet Dane Booth, and we were going to do a fantasy football league draft that day. And as I was driving over to where the draft was going to be, my phone rang, and it was my sister. And my sister lives in California. It's 3 hours different. And it's fairly early. I mean, it's 9 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday morning, and my sister calls me at 6 o'clock her time. I think that's kind of strange. She says, "Have you talked to Mom and Dad?" "No, why?" "Well, I just noticed that on my answering machine there's a message from Mom, and she called at what would have been 5 o'clock their time." I said, "Well, that's strange." And so I tried to call my parents, and there was no answer. I tried both their cell phones. There was no answer. I said, "Sandra, is there any other phone numbers that appear in your caller ID?" And she says, "Well, there is one, but I don't recognize it." I said, "Read me the number off." She read me the number off. I called it, and it was a hospital. And I said, "Is there a J.J. Turner there?" And they said, "Hold on just a second." And they came back and they said, "Yeah, Mr. Turner had been admitted earlier today." And it turned out my father, in the middle of the night, had gotten up to go to the restroom, and standing in the doorway between the bathroom and their bedroom, my father just stood there. And my mother woke up and said, "What are you doing?" And my father started repeating over and over again, "I'm all right, I'm all right, I'm all right." "JJ, are you okay?" "I'm all right, I'm all right, I'm all right." "Well, come back to bed." "I'm all right, I'm all right, I'm all right." And then he sat down and just laid down in the middle of the floor. And my father had a TIA, so a slight stroke. And this is my father. My father's in great shape. My father runs and works out and lifts weights and has always been a very physically fit person. And my father had a stroke. You just never know. Jim Elliot took and sold his future, pretty much. He had a bright future ahead of him, and he he gave it all up to go on a mission field, to take the Word of God to places where no one had ever heard of the Word of God before. And those of you who've seen the movie The End of the Spear, has anyone seen that yet? Once it comes out, if you haven't seen it yet, you really ought to, because it's a very compelling story about a group of missionaries who are taking the gospel into the deepest, darkest jungles, and they're killed by the people they're trying to take the gospel to. Jim Elliot died in a stream at the point of a spear. You just never know. And if that's why Mr. Piven wrote his book, the fact that you just never know is why God wrote his book. And so open up to Daniel chapter 3, and I want us to look at this story together. Daniel chapter 3, verse 1. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold 90 feet high and 9 feet wide. That's pretty impressive. And set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. He then summoned the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials to come to the dedication of the image he had set up. So, the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials assembled for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before it. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, "This is what you are commanded to do, O peoples, nations, and men of every language." Do you notice how many commas there are in this? A lot of lists here. "As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace." Therefore, as soon as they heard the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, and all kinds of music, all the peoples, nations, and men of every language fell down and worshipped the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Let's stop right there for just a second. Now, you remember if you were here last week that at the end of Daniel chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar looks like he may be about to kind of turn a corner on some stuff. Nebuchadnezzar looks like he may be about to become a believer, because Daniel has been able to not only tell him what his dream meant, he told him what the dream was, and then told him what it meant. And he revealed this amazing story about what God was going to accomplish in the world. He let Nebuchadnezzar in on a little glimpse of what the future was going to hold. And Nebuchadnezzar says, "There is no God like your God. Your God is the God of gods and the Lord of kings." And he says all this amazing stuff that would lead you to believe that Nebuchadnezzar was sort of on the verge of some kind of breakthrough. But now, we find out that Nebuchadnezzar has kind of a selective memory of what has just happened. Because he remembers some parts, and he forgets other parts. He forgets that part about the stone that's carved out of a mountain, but not with human hands, that strikes the base of the statue and everything crumbles as a result of it. He forgets that part. He does seem to remember something about gold and a statue. So he's got a gold statue, and he remembers something about the feet. You guys remember something about the feet of that statue? What were the feet made of? Clay and iron, which don't really mix together. And so they're having a hard time mixing together. And Nebuchadnezzar, who seems to be, he's a pretty shrewd guy, says, "You know what? That's kind of like my kingdom." Because Babylon has conquered all these people and has brought in diverse groups of people. They have Jewish people, and they have Assyrian people, and they have Medo-Persian people, and they have Philistines. They got all these different kinds of people, and they're not real good at meshing, at mixing, at getting along. You know, we would call this multiculturalism. And we would think that we're the first people to invent multiculturalism. But no, Babylon, 500 years before Jesus, was experiencing multicultural problems. We like to think that we're all just one big melting pot, but sometimes some of us have a hard time melting, and we kind of stick out, and we have a hard time getting together. It's hard to get along. Mixing is difficult. So Nebuchadnezzar says what is needed is some unifying factor. If we could have some unifying factor that would bring everybody together, then maybe my statue would stand stronger. Because clearly, if it's got feet that haven't mixed together very well, it's vulnerable. So, what can we do to breed unity here? He says, you know what? Let's create a new religion. And through religion, we'll bring unity here. And so that's what he does. He builds a statue. And it's interesting that, who is the God who's being worshipped here? Anybody? Doesn't say that, does it? We tend to think, well, it's Nebuchadnezzar, but it's not. We don't know. We don't know who it is. We don't know what this god or goddess is behind it. And I think the writer is kind of intentional about leaving it vague. And really, to some extent, it doesn't matter, because what we're seeing here is that this has less to do with religion and more to do with politics and power. So what god it is or what goddess it is, that's not that important. We do know it's 90 feet high and it's made of gold. So Nebuchadnezzar has made a pretty substantial investment in trying to unify his people here. And he has music composed and played on every instrument imaginable. That's why we get this big long list, and the list is repeated several times. These lists are repeated in order to sound impressive, okay? And the people take this kind of pilgrimage out to the plain of Dura, which is outside the city limits of Babylon. And there's this very impressive gathering. All the leaders of their nation, a lot of different tribes and tongues and different ethnicities. Everybody is all gathered together in this one place for this giant spectacle. Kind of like the opening ceremonies. Did you guys see the opening ceremonies the other night? Boy, that's impressive, isn't it? Except for the Yoko Ono part, but you know. But, yeah, so it's a very impressive gathering, sort of like that, with all the music and the plastic cows and I didn't understand some of it. I just have to admit, I'm sure it was artistic and all that, but it's a big gathering, and when they play the music, that would be so inspiring. You have to imagine what that would sound like, what that would feel like to be there with all of those people, very impressive guests and impressive things going on around you. And when that music plays, it's very, very loud. And if that's not enough to inspire you to bow down, the king makes this statement that says, if you don't bow down, then you'll be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. So, sure enough, that works. And the music plays. And verse 7 says, as soon as they heard the sound of the horn, all the stuff, nations and all the peoples, nations, and men of every language fell down. Literally, it's as soon as they were hearing, they were falling. So it's almost like a race to see who can hit the ground first, And people are just dropping, drop. And you got to imagine what that's like. And everybody is face down on the ground except these three guys. These three guys who not only are just three random guys, these are three of the highest ranking officials in all the land. And they're not bowing down. Now, what's that like? I mean, you're standing there, and you march out to this plain. You see this giant statue, a huge orchestra set up. Every leader you've ever heard of is there. The music starts to play. The guy makes the announcement, if you don't bow down when you hear the music, then you'll be thrown into a blazing furnace. So you hear the music, you hit the ground. At what point in time do people start to realize that there are three people still standing? Is it a little ripple at first? Is it, psst, hey, I'm not looking up, I'm not looking up. No, look. So you peek and you see, and now I'm not looking at the statue, I'm not looking at the ground, I'm looking at those three guys. And at some point in time, it starts to spread as neighbor nudges neighbor, and now no one is looking at the statue, no one's looking at the ground, everybody is looking at these three guys. And in verse 8, says, at this time, some astrologers came forward and denounced the Jews. Literally started tearing them to pieces. You could translate it as they're slandering them, real intense hostility towards them. And they said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "O king, live forever. You've issued a decree, O king, that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, and all that stuff must fall down and worship the image of gold, and whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into a blazing furnace. But there are some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, O king. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold you have set up." They're really, really hostile towards the three guys, towards Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And I think one of the reasons may be because they're foreigners who have been promoted above them. There may be some jealousy at work here. Okay? That may be what's going on. Now, given what you know to this point of King Nebuchadnezzar's character, how do you suppose he's going to respond to this? We've seen that he does not deal well with frustration. He has a low frustration tolerance. He's on the verge of burnout as it is. He's fragile, and frazzled and has a short fuse. So look at verse 13. Furious with rage. Notice how quickly he goes from 0 to furious. Right? There's no well, maybe. No, just instantly. Furious with rage. Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king, and Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I have set up? Now, when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and all kinds of music, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand?" Now stop there for a second, because he asks them two questions. And I think he's using rhetorical questions. You guys know what rhetorical questions are. You're not looking for information. You're trying to prove a point. Parents love rhetorical questions. We just love you. "Do you want me to give you a spanking?" You think a kid's going to go, "Well, I was thinking about going outside, but okay." You're not looking for information there. You're trying to prove a point, okay? And I think that's what's going on with Nebuchadnezzar. He's not asking them for information. "Tell me the name of the God who's going to rescue you." No, he's saying, "Listen, no one is going to get you out of this. If you don't obey me, your goose is cooked." Okay? And but they treat it like it's not a rhetorical question. They actually give him an answer. As bizarre as that is. So look at, where is it? Verse 16. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, which he was not looking for. "O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to save us from it, and he will rescue us from your hand, O king." Now stop right there. Because this is an amazing statement of faith. The God we serve is able. The God we serve is able to rescue us from this situation. The God we serve is able to save us from your hand. The God we serve is able to deliver us from the fiery furnace. And I don't think it's possible for us to reflect on this phrase often enough. Our God, the God we serve, is able. I mean, if we wanted to, we could be here all night and just go around the room, and we could all probably tell some story of some time in our past when the odds were long and the deck was stacked against us and all hope was gone, and the odds makers in Vegas would have said, "There is not a prayer of you coming through this unscathed." And yet, we could all tell stories that reveal that our God is able. I just want to share one with you. This is from a book by Ken Davis. And Ken writes this story. It's a great story. He says, "A pastor friend of mine, Joel Morgan, planned on visiting missionaries in Eastern Europe. He asked friends who traveled in that area what he ought to pack. And there were many helpful suggestions, but everyone agreed that the one thing you ought to pack is food. Because while staying in rural villages with no electricity, no running water, you might be forced to go without meals. So it would be wise to have easily packed snacks on hand. And one missionary warned Joel to bring more than he'd need, because some of his supplies might be confiscated by customs officials. So Joel asked himself, he's wandering through the grocery store, what shall I take that won't catch the eye of a customs agent and won't spoil and will give me an energy boost? And he kind of whispered this prayer as he walked through the grocery store. Lord, you know the things that I'll need and the things that will make it through customs. I'm just going to walk down these aisles trusting you to prompt me to select the right items. He's walking through and his eyes fall on a display of Reese's peanut butter cups. And so he thinks, oh, they won't spoil, and there'll be lots of energy, and maybe a customs agent won't even know what they are. So he puts a king-size pack of them in his cart. Farther on down the aisle, he sees a display for pudding. And he thinks, pudding? Pudding. And I'm not sure he actually did this with his hand, but he said pudding, you know. But he goes over, and the only kind of pudding they have is tapioca. And he doesn't even know what tapioca pudding tastes like, but he thinks pudding is pudding. So anytime anyone is drawn to tapioca pudding, that's got to be a sign from God, you know. So he puts some tapioca pudding in his cart, and then he scoops up some small cans of fruit cocktail, some gum, and some hard candy. And he says, surely these things will tide me over if I get hungry. Okay, on the fourth day of the trip, Joel arrives in Timisoara, Romania. Okay, and he was going to spend several days with a couple who'd been there working with a church for 14 months. And the family had been sent there by a missions organization and had really just kind of been forgotten about. So they go 14 months facing terrible conditions, heat and electricity oftentimes turned off for days at a time. And Joel and his team are the first English-speaking people the missionaries have seen in 6 months. Okay? Just the opportunity to talk to somebody in English was cause for celebration. They had 2 teenage daughters who were just starved for anything American. Joel spends time with the family, chatting and praying with them, and they're about to leave, and suddenly he thinks, oh, I got my bag of goodies. And he gets this idea. He says, I know it's only October, but maybe this could be like an early Christmas for everybody, okay? So he goes, he gets his backpack, he's got all the goodies hidden inside of it, and he sits down with the family like Santa Claus with a big pack, you know. And he asked the 2 teenage girls if they could have one thing from the U.S., what would it be? And they said, candy. And he says, what kind? And the mother says, the girls love Reese's peanut butter cups. But they're not available in this part of the world. So Joel reaches into his backpack and he pulls out this king-size package that he'd smuggled into the country. And the girls just jump up and down. They're just laughing so hard. This is like he's just handed them a winning lottery ticket. And he wipes a tear from his eye and he asks the mother, what about you? What item, one thing from the States? And he's thinking, oh, I hope she doesn't say a side of beef, you know. And she says, you know what I miss? I miss fruit. And he's got fruit cocktail. And he's got a little tin of mandarin oranges. And as he's reaching to get this little tin of mandarin oranges, you know what she says? Especially citrus. He pulls out this can of mandarin oranges and all these fruit cocktail, and everybody's laughing and crying. And he turns to the dad. And he says, all right, Gary, what's your favorite dessert? And Gary says, my favorite dessert is something nobody else in the world likes. And he says, tell me it's not tapioca pudding. And Gary's eyes got that big. And the whole family says, no way. And sure enough, he reaches in and pulls out this Super 4 snack pack of tapioca pudding that God had prompted him to buy 7 days earlier and 4,000 miles away. Listen, stories like that happen. And we might be tempted to say, oh, that's just a coincidence. Yeah, right. Coincidence, nothing. Our God is able. Our God does amazing things. The God we serve is able to heal and to restore and to liberate We could go around this room and tell stories about people that we know, marriages that were all but gone that have been restored. People who were held in bondage of addiction who have been liberated. People who have been unable to reconcile, who have now found it within them to forgive, because our God is able to forgive and to provide and to guide us with wisdom and to soften the hardest heart of the most reckless prodigal you've ever seen. Our God is able, and we cannot meditate on that enough. The God we serve is able. But here's our problem. Sometimes, and this is going to sound weird coming from somebody like me, but it's true. Sometimes I think we know the Bible too well for our own good. Because, especially with a story like this, I mean, come on, most of you know this story, right? Most of us know this story. We grew up hearing this story. We hear stories like this. We hear stories of Abraham sacrificing Isaac, and we know how it's going to end, and so we rush through the middle to get to the end. We hear stories of David and Goliath, and we know how that story is going to end, and so we rush through the middle parts, the scary parts, to get right to the end. We keep peeking at that last page to make sure that the ending hasn't changed. We know how this story ends, but we can't rush through it because life doesn't work like that. In life, you live one verse at a time. In life, you don't know the end from the beginning. And our problem with this story is we know the story too well. We know the story better than Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego know it. Stop and think what a powerful statement they've just made. The God we serve is able. But if you think that's powerful, it's the next one. What comes next is even more so. You got to think about these three guys, okay? Hang on. Before you go there, think about these three guys. We've talked about Daniel this way, but think about these three. They're growing up, probably teenagers, living in Jerusalem, affluent families, high level of get it for them. Kind of golden boys. They go to private schools. They drive the right kind of car. They're pretty certain of what their future is going to look like. They're going to go to the right college. They're going to get the right kind of job. They're going to settle down and have the right kind of kids. They're going to live in a certain kind of house. They're going to go to a certain kind of church. They know pretty much what their future is going to look like. And then all of a sudden, one day, in the middle of their AP English class, the Gestapo walks in and marches them 700 miles away to a foreign country where they don't speak the language, they don't know the customs, they don't know which end is up. It would have taken them, David figured this out the other night for us, it would have taken them almost a third of a year to march from where they were to where they ended up. A third of a year, probably close to 100 days it would have taken them to walk that far in a big crowd of people. And they get there and they don't know what is going on. And you think they prayed? You think they prayed to wake up? You ever prayed that prayer? God, just let me wake up and be in 4th grade again. God, just let me wake up and let it be the day before the prom. God, just let me wake up and let it be the night before I went out and did that. You ever prayed that prayer? God, just let me wake up and have my innocence again. You think they prayed that prayer? And they're officials. They're high-ranking officials. They would have known they would have seen the construction going out there on the plain of Dura. You don't erect a 90-foot golden statue overnight. They would have seen this coming. They would have known what was happening. They were smart guys. God had given them wisdom and insight. You think they prayed? Oh, God, this cannot end well. God, don't let this happen. You think they would have heard that the rumors that the king is going to issue a decree that you have to bow down and worship? They probably would have heard something about this. And you think they prayed? God, don't let it come to that. But it does. And maybe they prayed, God, surely with Daniel's influence, Daniel will be able to come up with some kind of an exemption for us. But it doesn't happen. You think they prayed? I bet they did. Think they prayed, God, Nebuchadnezzar is so close to becoming a believer. Let him just come all the way around that corner and have a change of heart. It didn't happen. Maybe they prayed, okay, God, if it comes down to it, let everybody be so glued to the floor that they don't see us standing up. But that didn't happen either. And you got to imagine, when they realize that they've been discovered, they wake up in the middle of their worst case scenario. And what do when you face the worst case scenario? Because the truth is, you just never know. Verse 16. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to save us from it, and he will rescue us from your hand, O king. But even if he does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. We want you to know God still can. God can still rescue, okay? He hasn't lost the ability to intervene here. He still has all the power he has ever had. And the God who gave Abraham and Sarah a child, the God who brought the plagues on the Egyptians, the God who parted the Red Sea, the God who provided manna in the wilderness, the God who crushed the walls of Jericho, the God who killed Goliath with one tiny stone, that God still is able. But even if he doesn't, even if he does not, we want you to know we've already made up our minds. And our devotion to him is not tied to what he might do for us. See, God is able. I really believe God is able to do amazing things in Jerusalem and in Babylon and in Rome and in Alpharetta. But let me just ask you, what if he doesn't? Is your devotion to God based on getting what you want? Because the truth about me is, all too often, when circumstances are going really well, I find it really easy to pray and to worship and to be joyful. When things don't go my way, when things are frustrating, when things don't work out the way I want them to work out, can I still find it in me to pray and to worship and be joyful? What if? I'm not saying he can't, because I believe he is able, but what if he doesn't? Rick Pearson. Rick Pearson was 20-something, good-looking kid. Talented musician, singer, songwriter, played guitar, beautiful voice. He was leading worship at a camp, summer camp, last summer. Camp called Big Stuff. And at Big Stuff, it's down in Panama City Beach, and they bring in tens of thousands of teenagers from all over America to this camp. They bring in about 2,000 kids a week. They run it for 9 or 10 weeks. It's a huge, huge camp. They bring in big headline speakers, and they have a great worship team, and Rick was on that worship team. And Rick got sick. He had a little cough, and then it turned into, he felt like he had a summer cold or something like that, and it just would not go away. He went out to play golf with some friends, a friend of mine. They went out to play golf. And my friend looked at him and said, "Hey, Rick, you look terrible." Rick said, "I got this thing and it won't go away." "Well, go to the doctor." "I can't, I don't have insurance." "Well, go to the doctor, I'll pay for it." Rick goes to the doctor, they start running tests. Rick has leukemia. 60 days later, they put Rick in the ground. Right before Rick died, shortly before he died, the company I work for released a CD of worship songs called I Believe, and one of the songs on there is called Even If. It's a song that Rick wrote and sang for us. Even if I don't understand, and even if I can't see your hand, I'll never cease to lift up my praise. I remember Terry Gibney, who was an elder in a church that my wife became a Christian in. He was a faculty member at Pepperdine University, and I watched him as he lost his battle to cancer. I watched him as his body had just been eaten away, stand up in front of a group of people just like you, and he's barely able to stand. And I watched him stumble up there and preach out of the book of Job and say, "Yea, though he slay me, still will I trust him." Can you say that? I sat with a woman not too long ago, and she was having some trouble with her ex-husband and the custody situation. It was turning really ugly, and attorneys and all kinds of things. And they were threatening to take her daughter from her. And I asked her, what if? Yeah, but God is able. Yeah, but what if? Yeah, but God has got to. But what if? God is going to. What if? And she said, John, I cannot let myself think about that. And I said, you must let yourself think about that. Because what if? Because you just never know. Tonight I'm going to invite you to get real honest with God and just sit with Him for a minute and look into your heart. And if you can muster it up, I'm going to ask you to just tell Him, God, I believe you're able. I don't know what you came in here with, but I know that we're a diverse group of people who came in here with a lot of different things. And some of you have work situations, and some of you have relational situations. You got marriage situations, you got kid situations, you got educational situations, you got health situations and financial situations. We got all kinds of stuff that we brought in here with us. And we all together believe that God is able. But what if? Have you thought about that? Do you know how you'll respond? Because ultimately, you know why I think the writer leaves that statue unnamed? Because ultimately, that 90-foot statue of gold that we're all tempted to bow down to is me. I want my way. And I'll do whatever it takes. If I have to curse God, if I have to walk out, if I have to abandon commitments, if I have to break covenant, if I have to break fellowship, if I have to, whatever it takes, I'll get what I want. Roll the clock forward 500 years, and a man goes into a garden alone to pray. And he knows what's coming. And he prays so hard that his sweat comes out like blood. And he says, God, I don't want to. God, I don't want this. God, this can't be the only way. Surely there's got to be some other way. In the end, he said, but even if you don't. And the next day he went to a cross, and while he was dying, he said, yea, though he slay me, still will I trust him. We have a few minutes. And I don't know what you brought in here with you. Maybe you're looking around and you know people in this room who brought in burdens. And maybe now's the time for you to go to them and sit with them and put your hand on their shoulder and pray with them, that they'll find the strength to be able to say, God, we believe that you are able to deliver, to liberate, to forgive, to heal. But even if you don't, give us the wisdom and courage to trust you, even when. I just want you to bow your heads and get real still in front of God. And I'll close this out in a minute. Surely the arm of the Lord is strong to heal and deliver. And we believe that, God. We believe that the God that we serve is able. And we've seen you accomplish great things. We've read about them. We've rehearsed those stories over and over again. And we've lived them out. We've seen them with our own eyes, God, where you have done great things. But God, we also confess there are times when we pray so hard that our throats get sore. We cry out to you for deliverance or for healing or for wholeness. And sometimes it happens and sometimes it doesn't. And God, our devotion to you is so fickle. When you deliver, we're the first ones to say, "Yea, God." And when you don't, we're the first ones to say, "But God, I thought, but God, where are..." Well, I'll just do it myself next time. God, you're infinitely wiser than we are. And your ways are not our ways. Your thoughts are not our thoughts. And you alone know the end from the beginning. So God, give us the courage of these 3 Israelites to say, the God that we serve is able to deliver, to restore, to resuscitate. But even if He does not, we will not abandon Him. Because God, even though you don't always deliver us the way we would have you deliver us, we know that you never abandon us. God, give us courage. Make us brave. Steel our resolve. Enough to say, with Job, with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and with your Son Jesus, yea, though He slay me, still will I trust Him. Because like Peter said, where else are we going to go? Only you have the words of life. So God, we trust that in the end, you will make everything right, and that we will understand, even when we don't now. So keep us from wresting control of our destiny away from you, and allow us, please, to live our lives fully surrendered to you. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. We'll see you next week.